The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Trinidad, Colorado, as Delilah Haywood's haunting soprano echoed through the saloon. Men stopped mid-drink, conversations died, and for one precious moment, the raucous establishment fell under her spell. It was 1875, and her voice was both her blessing and her curse. "That's enough of that fancy singin'," Sheriff Randall slurred, slamming his empty whiskey glass on the wooden bar. "We want something lively, girl, not that opera trash." Delilah clutched her worn sheet music tighter to her chest. At 22, she'd traveled from Boston with dreams of bringing culture to the frontier, but Trinidad wasn't ready for Verdi or Puccini. Still, she persisted. "With all due respect, Sheriff, I was hired to perform classical pieces." The saloon owner, Edgar Billings, shot her a warning glance. He'd been kind enough to hire her, but even his patience had limits. The miners and cowboys wanted bawdy tunes after long days of backbreaking work, not arias. "I said enough." Sheriff Randall stood, towering over her small frame. The whiskey had made him mean, and the badge gave him authority no one dared challenge. "Either sing something that'll get these boys stomping their feet or get off that stage." Delilah lifted her chin. "I am an artist, sir. I will not compromise my craft." What happened next became the talk of Trinidad for weeks to come. The sheriff grabbed her arm, dragging her from the small wooden platform that served as a stage. When she resisted, two of his deputies joined in, pushing her toward the saloon doors. "You stubborn little songbird," Randall growled. "Maybe a night in the jail will teach you some manners." The first blow caught her across the cheek, an open-handed slap that sent her sheet music flying. The second knocked her to her knees on the dusty floor. Blood trickled from her split lip as rough hands hauled her upright. "Stop it," she cried, struggling against their grip. "You cannot do this," but they could, and they did. In Trinidad, the sheriff's word was law, and defiance meant punishment. No one in the saloon moved to help her, no one, except a man who had been sitting quietly in the corner, nursing a single whiskey for the past hour. "That's enough." The voice cut through the commotion like a knife through butter, low, steady, and carrying an undeniable authority that had nothing to do with badges or guns. The crowd parted as Mason Stanton rose to his full height. His weathered duster bore the dust of the trail, and his face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. But there was no mistaking the determination in his stance or the dangerous calm in his blue eyes. "This ain't your business, Stanton," Sheriff Randall spat. "Go back to your ranch." Mason stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. "You're beating a woman for singing. I'm making it my business." The tension in the saloon was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone knew Mason Stanton, the quiet rancher whose spread north of town employed half the county. He rarely came to town, and when he did, he kept to himself. But the few who had crossed him spoke of a man who didn't make threats, he made promises. "She was disturbing the peace," Randall countered, but his grip on Delilah's arm loosened slightly. Mason's gaze fell on Delilah, taking in her torn dress, the bruise forming on her cheek, and the defiant spark still burning in her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges of his stern mouth. "Then sing on my porch where you're safe," he said quietly to her. Then, louder to the sheriff, "Miss Haywood will be coming with me, Sheriff. Unless you want to explain to Judge Parker why you're arresting a woman for performing the job she was hired to do." The mention of the federal judge made Randall hesitate. His jurisdiction was local, but Parker's reached across territories, and the judge was known for his harsh view of lawmen who abused their power. "Fine," Randall finally growled, shoving Delilah toward Mason. "Take your songbird, but keep her off the streets of my town." Mason caught Delilah gently by the shoulders to steady her. "Are you all right, Miss Haywood?" Delilah's head swam with confusion and pain, but she managed a nod. Yes, but my things, I'll send someone for them tomorrow." Mason turned to the saloon owner. "Mr. Billings, I trust you'll look after Miss Haywood's belongings until my foreman can collect them." Edgar Billings, clearly relieved to see the situation diffused, nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Stanton. I'll have them ready." Mason guided Delilah toward the door, keeping his body between her and the sheriff. The crowd parted silently, avoiding the cowboy's steady gaze. Only when they reached the boardwalk outside did Delilah fully realize what had just happened. "Sir, while I appreciate your intervention, I cannot possibly— Can you ride?" Mason interrupted, leading her toward a magnificent palomino hitched at the post. Yes, but good. It's 5 miles to my ranch and night's coming on fast." He untied the horse and mounted in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. "We can discuss propriety after I've seen to that cut on your lip." Delilah hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. With surprising gentleness, he pulled her up behind him. "Hold on," he instructed, and she tentatively placed her hands at his waist. As they rode out of town, Delilah became acutely aware of her situation. She was leaving behind everything she owned, riding off with a man she barely knew to a ranch she'd never seen. But for the first time since arriving in Trinidad 3 months ago, she felt something unexpected. Safe. The palomino's steady gait lulled her into a trance as they traveled through the gathering dusk. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills dotted with pinyon pines and junipers, the distant peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains turning purple against the darkening sky. "I know what you're thinking," Mason said after they'd ridden in silence for nearly a mile. "That you've jumped from the frying pan into the fire." Delilah stiffened. "The thought had crossed my mind, Mr. Stanton. Mason, just Mason." He guided the horse around a bend in the road. "My foreman's wife lives at the ranch along with 3 other families. You'll have your own cabin, the old schoolmistress's place. She moved to Denver last month." Relief washed through Delilah. "That's very kind." "It's not kindness, Miss Haywood, it's decency." His voice hardened. "What happened back there wasn't right, Delilah," she offered. "And no, it wasn't right, but it wasn't unexpected either." Mason turned slightly in the saddle, his profile strong against the last light of day. "How did a classically trained singer end up in Trinidad, Colorado?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. Most people danced around such inquiries, but Mason Stanton apparently wasn't most people. "My father was a music professor at the conservatory in Boston," she began. "He taught me everything he knew from the time I could speak. When he died last year, the new director— Well, he made it clear my position as an instructor was contingent on certain favors. So you ran west." "I chose dignity over degradation," she corrected. "I thought perhaps the frontier might appreciate culture, or at least respect talent." Mason fell silent for a long moment. "The West respects strength above all," he finally said. "And it takes strength to stand by your principles the way you did tonight." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. They crested a small rise, and suddenly, the Stanton Ranch spread before them, a cluster of buildings nestled in a protected valley, with corrals and outbuildings arranged in a tidy pattern around a 2-story main house. Lamplight glowed in several windows, and smoke curled from chimneys against the deepening blue of the sky. "Welcome to Cottonwood Creek Ranch," Mason said, a note of pride in his deep voice. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, lantern held high. "That you, boss?" he called. "It's me, Jake," Mason answered, reining in the palomino. "We've got a guest. This is Miss Delilah Haywood. She'll be staying in the teacher's cabin for a while. Jake, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a silver-streaked beard, approached and tipped his hat. "Madam." His gaze lingered briefly on her bruised face, but he asked no questions. "Jake's my foreman," Mason explained as he dismounted. "He and his wife, Harriet, keep this place running when I'm away." Mason reached up to help Delilah down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. "Steady," Mason murmured, keeping a supportive hand at her elbow. "Jake, would you ask Harriet to prepare some food and bring it to the teacher's cabin? And maybe some of her healing salve for Miss Haywood's face." "Right away, boss." Jake hurried toward the main house. Mason led Delilah toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings. "It's not much," he said as he opened the door and lit a lamp that sat on a table just inside. "But it's clean and dry." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cookstove, and a bookshelf lined with worn volumes. But it was neat and surprisingly homey, with colorful quilts on the bed and curtains at the windows. "It's perfect," Delilah said softly, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. She sank into one of the chairs, her legs finally giving out. Mason knelt before her, concern etched on his features. "Let me see that cut." Hesitantly, she leaned forward, allowing him to examine her injured lip. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as they tilted her chin toward the lamplight. "It's not too deep," he said. "Harriet's salve should help it heal quickly." Their eyes met in the golden glow of the lamp, and something passed between them, a current of understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits. Mason cleared his throat and stood, breaking the moment. "Why did you help me?" Delilah asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Mason moved to the window, looking out at the night that had fully descended on the ranch. "My mother was a singer," he said quietly. "Not classical like you, she sang old Scottish ballads and folk songs, but she believed music was sacred, a gift to be shared." He turned back to face her. "When I saw Randall strike you for nothing more than sharing your gift, well, I couldn't stand by." Before Delilah could respond, there was a knock at the door. A plump, motherly woman entered carrying a tray laden with food and a small jar. "Harriet," Mason said, "this is Miss Haywood." "Land's sake, child, what happened to your poor face?" Harriet exclaimed, setting down her tray and immediately examining Delilah's injuries with gentle fingers. "Jake said you'd had some trouble, but he didn't say what kind." "Sheriff Randall happened," Mason said grimly. Harriet's face darkened. "That man's been needing a comeuppance for years." She opened the jar of salve. "This might sting a bit, dear, but it'll take the swelling down by morning." As Harriet tended to her injuries, Delilah found herself studying Mason Stanton more carefully. He wasn't what one might call traditionally handsome. His face was too weathered, his features too sharp, but there was a compelling quality to him. Strength, certainly, in the breadth of his shoulders and the confident way he carried himself, but also a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing presence. "There now," Harriet said, finishing her ministrations. "You eat something, then get some rest. Things will look brighter in the morning." She turned to Mason. "You too, boss, you look done in." Mason nodded. "I'll be along shortly, Harriet. Thank you." After Harriet departed, Mason lingered in the doorway. "Will you be all right here alone?" Delilah managed a small smile. "I believe I will. Thank you, Mr. Stanton Mason, for everything." "My offer stands, you know," he said quietly. "About singing on my porch. The ranch hands would appreciate it, I think. Real music, not saloon songs." The unexpected reminder of his words in the saloon brought a genuine smile to Delilah's face, despite her split lip. "I would like that very much. Get some rest, Delilah. We'll talk more tomorrow." With that, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Left alone, Delilah ate some of the hearty stew Harriet had brought, then changed into a nightgown someone had thoughtfully laid out for her. As she slipped beneath the quilt on the narrow bed, she found herself wondering about the enigmatic rancher who had rescued her. There was more to Mason Stanton than met the eye, a depth of character that intrigued her far more than it should. Sleep claimed her quickly, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of Boston or her father or the life she'd left behind. Instead, she dreamed of wide open spaces under endless skies, and a deep voice that carried on the wind like a promise. Morning came with golden light streaming through the curtains, and the distant sounds of a working ranch, voices calling, horses nickering, the clang of metal from what must be the smithy. Delilah rose and found a basin of fresh water on the table along with a note. Sent word to town. Your things will arrive midday. Breakfast at the main house when you're ready. M. The handwriting was bold and clear, much like the man himself. Delilah washed quickly and dressed in yesterday's clothes, wincing at their rumpled state. Her reflection in the small mirror above the basin showed a purple bruise on her cheek, but the cut on her lip looked better than she expected, thanks to Harriet's salve. Outside, the ranch was a hive of activity. Men moved between the corrals and barns. A wagon loaded with hay trundled toward the pasture, and smoke rose from several chimneys. It was a far cry from the chaotic energy of Trinidad, with its dusty streets and crowded saloons. Here, every movement seemed purposeful, part of a greater whole. Delilah made her way to the main house, a substantial two-story structure built of squared logs with a wide porch wrapped around three sides. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal Harriet. There you are, dear. Come in, come in. Breakfast is still hot. She ushered Delilah into a large, warm kitchen where several people sat around a long table. Mason rose as she entered. Good morning. Did you sleep well? Very well, thank you. Delilah felt suddenly self-conscious under the curious gazes of the others at the table. Let me introduce you, Mason said. You've met Jake and Harriet Williams. This is Tom Cooper, our blacksmith, and his wife Elsie. That's Daniel Martinez, who handles our cattle drives, and Luis Vasquez, who manages the horses. Each person nodded or tipped their head in greeting. They were a diverse group, not what Delilah had expected on a Colorado ranch. Sit, sit, Harriet urged, pulling out a chair. You need a good meal after yesterday's ordeal. As platters of eggs, bacon, and biscuits were passed around, conversation flowed easily. No one asked about her bruised face or how she'd come to be at the ranch, for which Delilah was grateful. Instead, they talked of ranch business, the weather, and local gossip. Miss Haywood is a singer, Mason said during a lull in the conversation. Classical training from Boston. Is that so? Elsie Cooper's eyes lit up. My mama took me to an opera once in Denver. Thought it was the most beautiful thing I ever heard. What kind of songs do you sing, Miss Haywood? Daniel Martinez asked. Arias, mostly pieces from operas by composers like Verdi, Puccini, Mozart. Seeing their blank expressions, she added, but I know folk songs as well. Ballads from England, Ireland, Scotland. Mason's mother was Scottish, Jake said. Used to sing those old ballads while she worked. Boy could sing them too when he was younger. Mason's ears reddened slightly. That was a long time ago, Jake. You should sing for us sometime, Luis suggested to Delilah. Been a while since we had any real entertainment out here. Perhaps this evening, Mason said, glancing at Delilah, if Miss Haywood feels up to it. I would be delighted, Delilah replied, genuinely pleased at the prospect. It would be a small way to thank you all for your hospitality. After breakfast, Mason invited Delilah to tour the ranch. They walked side by side through the corrals and barns, Mason explaining the operation with obvious pride. My father started with just 50 acres and 20 head of cattle, he told her as they watched a group of cowboys working with young horses in a round pen. Now we run 5,000 head on 30,000 acres. It's impressive, Delilah said sincerely. You've built something remarkable here. Mason's expression softened. It's more than just land and cattle. It's a community. Everyone who works here has a stake in its success. He gestured toward the collection of small cabins beyond the main house. Every family that lives here shares in the profits. We succeed or fail together. That's unusual, isn't it? Delilah asked. Most ranches I've heard of operate differently. Most ranches don't last, Mason replied. The land's too hard, the work too demanding for one man to shoulder alone. My father understood that, and I've tried to honor his vision. They climbed a gentle rise that overlooked the ranch, and Mason pointed to the mountains beyond. Stanton land extends all the way to those foothills. There's a lake up there, clearest water you've ever seen. Maybe I'll take you there sometime. The casual suggestion of sometime implied a future that stretched beyond today, and Delilah felt a curious flutter in her chest. I'd like that, she said softly. Mason turned to look at her, his expression serious. Delilah, I want you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay. No obligations, no expectations. That's very generous, she replied. But I can't accept charity indefinitely. I need to make my own way. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I wasn't thinking of charity. Trinidad's growing. There are families with children who'd benefit from music lessons, and the ranch hands would consider it a privilege to hear you sing now and then. You're offering me a position. I'm suggesting a possibility, he corrected. The choice is yours. Before she could respond, they spotted a wagon approaching from the direction of town. That'll be your belongings, Mason said. Let's head back down. The wagon carried not only Delilah's trunk and valise, but also a letter from Edgar Billings, the saloon owner. Mason handed it to her with a questioning look. Your wages, most likely, he said. Billings seemed regretful about what happened. Delilah opened the envelope to find not only the money she was owed but a short note. Miss Haywood, I apologize for not intervening last night. Sheriff Randall has too much power in this town and too many are afraid to stand against him. Your talent deserves better than Trinidad. Best wishes, E. Billings. She folded the note thoughtfully. He's not a bad man, just a weak one. There are too many weak men in positions of authority, Mason replied, his voice hardening, and not enough who are willing to do what's right regardless of the cost. Delilah studied him, sensing there was more to his statement than a general observation. You've crossed paths with Sheriff Randall before, haven't you? A shadow crossed Mason's face. 3 years ago, Randall and his deputies caught a young Ute boy they claimed was stealing. Beat him half to death before anyone could intervene. The boy worked for me, Lewis's nephew. He wasn't stealing, he was delivering a message to the general store. What happened? I filed a complaint with the territorial governor. Nothing came of it, of course. But Randall knows I'm watching, and that I have friends in Denver who would listen if something similar happened again. That's why he backed down last night, Delilah realized. Mason nodded. Partly, but don't underestimate the effect your own courage had. Standing up to a man like Randall, that takes rare strength. His words warmed her, but Delilah shook her head. It wasn't courage so much as stubbornness. My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Stubbornness, courage, sometimes they're two sides of the same coin. Mason helped carry her trunk to the cabin. I have work to attend to, but I'll see you this evening. Perhaps you could grace us with a song or two after supper. I'd be honored, Delilah replied. After Mason left, Delilah unpacked her belongings, grateful to change into fresh clothes. Among her possessions was a small, leather-bound volume of poetry, her father's gift on her 16th birthday. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, thinking of how different her life had become in just 1 year. The afternoon passed quietly. Delilah spent some time reviewing her sheet music, selecting pieces that might appeal to her new audience. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, she heard a soft knock at her door. Harriet stood outside with a dress draped over her arm, a simple but elegant blue calico with white lace at the collar and cuffs. "Thought you might want something fresh for your debut," she said with a wink. "This belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Kansas City. Never did wear it much, said the color wasn't right for her, but it would suit you beautifully with your dark hair." "Oh, Harriet, I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," the older woman interrupted. "It's just gathering dust in my trunk. Besides, a pretty dress makes a woman stand taller, sing stronger. At least that's what my mama always said." Touched by the kindness, Delilah accepted the gift. "Thank you. Your mama was a wise woman." As the ranch hands and their families gathered for the evening meal, Delilah felt a nervous anticipation she hadn't experienced since her first recital at the Boston Conservatory. These people were different from any audience she'd performed for before, hardworking men and women who might never have heard operatic singing. She wore Harriet's dress, which fit as if made for her, and arranged her dark hair in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, but she held her head high as she joined the others at the long tables set up outside the main house. Mason sat at the head of the table, deep in conversation with Jake, but he looked up as she approached. Something flickered in his eyes, appreciation, perhaps, or surprise, before he rose to pull out the chair beside his own. "You look lovely," he said quietly as she sat down. "The blue suits you." "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "Harriet was kind enough to lend me the dress." Supper was a lively affair, with conversation and laughter flowing as freely as the coffee. Delilah found herself drawn into discussions about everything from cattle prices to the merits of different piano manufacturers. These people might live far from the cultural centers of the East, but they were far from uncultured. As the meal concluded and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mason stood and called for attention. "Many of you have heard that our guest, Miss Haywood, is a singer of some renown. She's kindly agreed to share her talent with us tonight." All eyes turned expectantly to Delilah as Mason offered his hand to help her rise. "The Porch has the best acoustics," he said with a smile that referenced his words from the previous night. Standing on the wide porch with the ranch spread out before her and the mountain silhouettes beyond, Delilah felt a curious sense of rightness. This was not the grand concert hall she had once dreamed of, but somehow it seemed more meaningful. "I thought I would begin with something from my homeland," she said to the gathered audience. "A folk song my father taught me, Barbara Allen." The haunting melody rose into the night air, her soprano voice clear and true. She sang of love and loss, of pride and regret, and in the faces of her listeners, she saw understanding. When the last note faded, there was a moment of profound silence before applause broke out. Encouraged, Delilah continued with several more pieces, some folk songs, some classical arias. For each, she briefly explained the story or context, drawing her audience into the world of the music. When she concluded with Schubert's Ave Maria, she saw tears glistening in Elsie Cooper's eyes and a suspicious moisture in Jake's weathered face. "That was beautiful, Miss Haywood," Lewis said, his voice rough with emotion. "Makes a man remember there's more to life than cattle and dust." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, and Delilah felt a deep satisfaction that had eluded her in the saloon performances. These people hadn't demanded bawdy songs or simple tunes, they had opened their hearts to the full range of her art. As the gathering broke up and people drifted toward their homes, Mason remained beside her on the porch. "You've cast a spell over my ranch," he said softly. "I haven't seen some of these men so moved since. Well, I can't recall when." "Music has that power," Delilah replied. "It speaks to something deep within us, something universal." "Will you walk with me?" Mason asked suddenly. "The night's too fine to waste indoors." They strolled away from the buildings, following a path that led toward a small creek. The moon had risen, casting silver light over the landscape and turning ordinary features into something magical. "Your voice is extraordinary," Mason said after they had walked in comfortable silence for a while. "Far too extraordinary for a place like Trinidad. Or perhaps exactly what a place like Trinidad needs," Delilah countered. "Beauty shouldn't be confined to concert halls and drawing rooms." Mason stopped, turning to face her. "Is that why you came west, to bring beauty to the frontier?" "Partly," she admitted. "But also to find a place where I could be judged on my own merits, not my father's reputation or other considerations." "And have you found it, that place?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. Delilah looked up at the vast canopy of stars, more brilliant here than she had ever seen them. "I believe I might have," she said softly. Mason's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and strong as they entwined with her own. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by that simple touch and something deeper that was growing between them. "It's getting late," he finally said, his voice low. "I should see you back to your cabin." The walk back was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. At her door, Mason released her hand reluctantly. "Will you sing again tomorrow evening?" Delilah smiled. "If you wish." "I do wish it." His eyes held hers in the moonlight. "Very much." After he had gone, Delilah stood for a long time on the small porch of her cabin, looking out at the peaceful ranch under the star-filled sky. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the stirring of hope, not just for a career or survival, but for something more precious. A place where her heart could take root. Days at Cottonwood Creek Ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings found Delilah helping Harriet with household tasks, or accompanying Elsie to gather eggs and herbs from the kitchen garden. Afternoons, she spent practicing her music or exploring the ranch's vast acreage, often with Mason as her guide when his duties allowed. And every evening, she sang on the porch of the main house, sometimes just for Mason and the permanent ranch residents, sometimes for a larger audience when cowboys from neighboring spreads rode over to hear the singing lady they'd heard about. A week passed, then two. Delilah's bruises faded, but her resolve to stay at Cottonwood Creek grew stronger. Mason had been right about music lessons. 3 families in the area had children with musical inclinations, and they were eager to pay for instruction. Between these lessons and occasional performances at church socials, Delilah began to establish herself as more than just a guest at the Stanton Ranch. It was during one such lesson, teaching 10-year-old Emily Parker to play a simple melody on the family's prized piano, that Sheriff Randall made his presence known again. "Miss Haywood," he said, appearing in the doorway of the Parker home like an unwelcome shadow. "Thought you'd have moved on by now." Emily's mother, Martha, stiffened. "Sheriff, we're in the middle of a lesson." "Won't take but a moment, madam." Randall's eyes never left Delilah's face. "Just wanted to let Miss Haywood know that her arrangement with Stanton hasn't gone unnoticed. Folks in town are talking." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from anger. What exactly are you implying, Sheriff? Just that a woman living on a bachelor's ranch without proper chaperonage is bound to create gossip. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Might be time to consider your reputation, Miss Haywood. Martha Parker stepped forward. Sheriff Randall, I can assure you that Miss Haywood's conduct has been beyond reproach. Now, if you'll excuse us, my daughter's lesson isn't finished. Randall touched the brim of his hat. Just passing along friendly advice, madam. At the door, he paused to add, by the way, Miss Haywood, the new territorial judge is due next month. Fellow named Wilson. Old friend of mine from Kansas. Real stickler for propriety he is. After he left, Martha apologized profusely. That man is a menace, she said, her hands shaking with anger, using his position to intimidate decent folk. It's all right, Mrs. Parker, Delilah assured her, though her own heart was racing. The sheriff and I have a history. It's more than that, Martha said grimly. Randall and Mason Stanton have been at odds for years. The sheriff can't touch Mason directly, too many powerful friends, so he goes after those Mason cares about. Those Mason cares about, Delilah repeated, the words sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. Martha's expression softened. Anyone with eyes can see Mason Stanton cares for you, Miss Haywood. The way he looks at you when you sing. Well, a blind man could see it. The ride back to Cottonwood Creek gave Delilah ample time to consider Martha's words and Randall's thinly veiled threat. By the time she reached the ranch, she had made a decision. Mason found her on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Delilah, he said, joining her at the railing, how were your lessons today? Enlightening, she replied, turning to face him. Sheriff Randall paid me a visit at the Parkers. Mason's expression darkened immediately. What did he want? To remind me that living on your ranch without proper chaperonage is fodder for gossip. She met his gaze steadily. And to mention that his friend, the new territorial judge, will be arriving next month. Wilson, Mason's jaw tightened. I've heard of him. Has a reputation for enforcing moral codes as he sees fit. Then perhaps it's time I found other accommodations, Delilah suggested, though the thought of leaving Cottonwood Creek created a painful tightness in her chest. No, Mason's response was immediate and firm. Randall's trying to intimidate you, intimidate us both. I won't let him succeed. Mason, I can't ask you to, you're not asking, I'm offering. He took her hands in his touch sending warmth through her despite the evening chill. Delilah, these past weeks, having you here, hearing you sing each night. It's brought something to Cottonwood Creek that I didn't realize was missing. Music, she suggested with a small smile. Life, he corrected. Joy, something beyond work and duty. He drew a deep breath. I don't want you to go, not because of Randall or gossip or anything else. The intensity in his eyes made her heart race. What are you saying, Mason? I'm saying. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I'm saying that I care for you, Delilah, more than I expected to, more than I thought possible after. Well, that's a story for another time. I care for you too, she admitted softly, but that doesn't solve our problem. A slow smile spread across Mason's face. Actually, it might. He squeezed her hands gently. There's a solution that would silence the gossips and thwart Randall's attempts to use propriety against us. Delilah's breath caught as she realized what he was suggesting. Mason, are you not yet? He interrupted. Not like this. When I ask that question, it won't be because of Randall or judges or gossip. It will be because it's what we both want, with no doubts or hesitations. Relief and disappointment mingled in Delilah's chest. Then what do you suggest? For now, we continue as we have been, but we'll be more careful. You'll stay with Harriet and Jake when I'm away from the ranch. And I'll speak with Reverend Thomas about having you board at the parsonage in town when you give lessons. And if that's not enough to quiet the gossip, Mason's expression grew determined. Then we'll face whatever comes together. I won't let Randall drive you away, Delilah. Not unless it's truly what you want. In that moment, with the last light of day gilding his features and sincerity shining in his eyes, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that leaving was the last thing she wanted. I want to stay, she said simply. Here at Cottonwood Creek. With you and the others. The smile that lit Mason's face was worth any amount of gossip or disapproval. Then that's what matters. The rest will sort itself out. But sorting itself out proved more complicated than either of them anticipated. Word of Sheriff Randall's visit to the Parker home spread quickly, and suddenly Delilah found her lessons canceled by 2 of her 3 students' families. They're afraid of crossing Randall, Mason said grimly when she told him. Can't say I blame them. The man has made life difficult for those who oppose him. The Parkers didn't cancel, Delilah pointed out. Mrs. Parker even invited me to stay for supper after Emily's lesson yesterday. Thomas Parker isn't the type to be intimidated. He's one of the few in the county who'll stand up to Randall. Mason sighed. But it puts you in a difficult position. Without those lessons, your independence is compromised. They were riding along the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the ranch, a favorite route for their increasingly frequent excursions together. Delilah guided her horse, a gentle mare Mason had chosen specifically for her closer to his palomino. I've been thinking about that, she said. What if I were to offer a concert? A real concert with proper programs and tickets. We could use the church in Trinidad. Reverend Thomas mentioned once that it has excellent acoustics. Mason considered the idea. It might work. The novelty would draw people, even those who wouldn't normally attend a classical performance. And it would establish me as a professional musician, not just a kept woman on your ranch. She blushed at the crude phrase, but it needed to be said. You've never been that, Mason said firmly. Not in my eyes or in the eyes of anyone whose opinion matters. But perception is powerful, Delilah countered. A public concert with Reverend Thomas's support would give me legitimacy apart from my connection to you. Mason reached across the space between their horses to touch her hand. Then we'll make it happen. I'll speak to Thomas when I'm in town tomorrow. The Reverend proved enthusiastic about the idea, offering the church without hesitation and even suggesting they make it a benefit for the church's roof repair fund. That way, even those who might disapprove of certain arrangements will find it hard to stay away, he said with a knowing twinkle in his eye. Preparations for the concert consumed Delilah's days. She selected a program that balanced accessible pieces with more challenging works, hoping to both entertain and elevate her audience. Posters were printed and distributed throughout Trinidad and neighboring communities, announcing an evening of classical song with Miss Delilah Haywood to be held in 2 weeks' time. The response was immediate and mixed. Some expressed excitement at the cultural offering. Others muttered about fancy Eastern music having no place in a frontier town. And running beneath it all was the undercurrent of gossip about Delilah's relationship with Mason Stanton. They're saying he set you up as his mistress, Elsie reported bluntly after a trip to town for supplies. That this concert is just a way to make it seem respectable. Let them talk, Delilah replied with more confidence than she felt. The concert will speak for itself. But the gossip took a more concrete form 3 days before the scheduled performance. Delilah was at the church, practicing with Mrs. Thomas at the piano, when Sheriff Randall and a thin, severe-looking man in a black suit entered. Miss Haywood, Randall said, his tone falsely cordial. Allow me to introduce Judge Wilson, recently arrived from Topeka. Judge Wilson's cold eyes assessed Delilah from head to toe. "Miss Haywood, I've heard a great deal about you." "I doubt that very much, Your Honor," Delilah replied coolly, "as you've only just arrived and my life is rather unremarkable." "On the contrary," Wilson countered, "your situation has been the subject of much discussion. A single woman living on a bachelor's ranch, giving private performances. It raises questions about your character." "The only questionable character I've encountered since arriving in Colorado is the man who beat me for singing," Delilah said, her chin lifting. "A crime for which there have been no consequences." Wilson's thin lips pressed together. Sheriff Randall was maintaining order in his town. You, however, have been flouting the social conventions that maintain order in our society. By teaching music to children, by singing in church. Delilah felt anger rising in her chest. "Or is it my friendship with Mason Stanton that offends your sensibilities?" "Friendship is a convenient euphemism, Miss Haywood," Wilson said coldly. "I am here to inform you that your concert cannot be held in this church. It would lend an air of respectability to what many consider an immoral arrangement." Mrs. Thomas, who had been silent until now, rose from the piano bench. "With all due respect, Judge Wilson, that decision lies with my husband and the church elders, not with the territorial court." "Perhaps," Wilson conceded. "But as judge, I can issue an injunction preventing public gatherings that may corrupt public morals, and I am prepared to do so if this concert proceeds." Delilah felt as though she'd been struck. "On what possible grounds? Disturbance of the peace, for one," Randall interjected gleefully. "After that ruckus you caused at the saloon. A performance license has not been obtained from the territorial authority," Wilson added, "and there are questions about the propriety of a woman in your position performing publicly at all." "This is absurd," Delilah protested. "There is no law against giving a concert in a church." "The law is what I interpret it to be, Miss Haywood," Wilson said coldly. "And I suggest you consider your position carefully. Continuing to reside at Stanton's ranch could result in more serious charges." After they left, Mrs. Thomas put a comforting arm around Delilah's shoulders. "Don't despair, my dear. My husband won't stand for this, and neither will Mason when he hears of it." "That's what I fear," Delilah said quietly. Mason challenging Wilson and Randall directly could have consequences for everyone at Cottonwood Creek, not just for me. That evening, when she told Mason what had transpired, his reaction was exactly as she'd feared. Fury darkened his features and his hands clenched into fists. "They've gone too far," he growled, pacing the length of the main house's parlor. "Using the law as a weapon to settle personal vendettas." "It's me they're targeting, not you," Delilah reminded him. "And perhaps they're right about one thing: my presence here has brought trouble to your door." Mason stopped pacing to look at her, his expression softening. "Delilah, you've brought nothing but joy to Cottonwood Creek. Everyone here would say the same. Even so, I can't allow my situation to jeopardize what you've built here." She took a deep breath. "Perhaps it would be best if I moved on. Denver, maybe, or even back east." "No." The word was spoken with such finality that Delilah was momentarily taken aback. Mason crossed to where she stood by the fireplace, taking her hands in his. "I told you once I wouldn't let Randall drive you away, and I meant it. But this isn't just Randall anymore," she pointed out. "Judge Wilson has actual authority that can be challenged. I have friends in Denver, one who sits on the territorial Supreme Court. I can send a telegram tomorrow." "And how long would such a challenge take? Weeks? Months?" Delilah shook her head. "In the meantime, I remain a liability to you and everyone here." Mason's grip on her hands tightened. "You're not a liability, Delilah. You're—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. You're essential to me now. These past weeks, watching you become part of Cottonwood Creek, hearing you sing each evening. I can't imagine this place without you anymore." The naked emotion in his voice made Delilah's heart race. "Mason, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I had a wife once, Caroline. She died in childbirth 6 years ago along with our son. After that, I threw myself into building this ranch, making it the community my father envisioned. I thought that was enough, that work and duty would fill the empty spaces." He released one of her hands to touch her cheek softly. "But then you came along with your music and your courage, and suddenly, those spaces didn't seem so empty anymore. You've brought something back to life in me, Delilah. Something I thought was gone forever." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. "I didn't know about your wife, your son. I'm so sorry." "I should have told you sooner," he acknowledged. "But that loss, it's not something I speak of easily. The point is, what I feel for you isn't casual or convenient. It's deep and real and worth fighting for, even if that fight pits you against the local sheriff and a territorial judge, especially then." A determined smile curved his lips. "I didn't build Cottonwood Creek by backing down from bullies, no matter what title they carried." Delilah studied his face, seeing the resolve there and something else, something that made her pulse quicken and hope bloom in her chest. "What do you propose?" "First, we proceed with your concert, but not at the church. We'll hold it here on the ranch. Wilson has no jurisdiction over private property beyond basic law enforcement." "But that defeats the purpose," Delilah objected. "The concert was meant to establish me as independent from you, not reinforce our connection." "Then we give them a connection they can't question," Mason said quietly. His eyes held hers, intense and serious. "Marry me, Delilah." The proposal, so direct and unadorned, took her breath away. "Mason, you can't." "I can, and I am." He drew her closer. "This isn't because of Randall or Wilson or gossip. It's because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you, hear you sing on our porch for years to come, maybe even teach our children to appreciate music the way your father taught you." "Our children," Delilah repeated softly, the words creating a vision of a future she hadn't dared imagine. "If you'll have me," Mason said, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. "I know it's sudden, and you had plans for a career that didn't include being a rancher's wife in Colorado." Delilah silenced him with a finger to his lips. "You know why I came west, Mason. Not just to escape an uncomfortable situation in Boston, but because I wanted something real, something authentic. In the East, everything was about appearances, about playing a role." She moved her hand to cup his cheek. "Since I arrived at Cottonwood Creek, I've felt more myself than I have since my father died. You've never asked me to be anything other than who I am. You've given my music a home when others tried to silence it. And you've shown me what it means to stand for something, to build something that matters." "Is that a yes?" Mason asked, hope lighting his eyes. "It's a yes," Delilah confirmed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you, Mason Stanton, and I would be honored to be your wife." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "We'll be married as soon as possible. Reverend Thomas can perform the ceremony right here on the ranch." "What about Wilson and his injunctions?" Delilah asked. A mischievous smile crossed Mason's face. "Let him try to prevent a wedding. Even Randall wouldn't risk the backlash from interfering with that." The news of their engagement spread through the ranch like wildfire, met with genuine delight from everyone at Cottonwood Creek. Harriet immediately began planning the wedding feast, while Elsie and the other women discussed decorations for the ceremony. "We'll hold it on the front porch," Mason decided, "where you first sang for us." The symbolism wasn't lost on Delilah. "Where you promised I would be safe," she reminded him softly. As they had anticipated, news of the impending marriage reached Trinidad quickly. The reaction was mixed, but notably, neither Sheriff Randall nor Judge Wilson made any move to interfere. Instead, 2 days before the wedding, Delilah received a visitor she hadn't expected. Edgar Billings, the saloon owner. "Miss Haywood," he said, hat in hand as he stood on the porch of her cabin. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion." "Mr. Billings," she acknowledged cautiously, "what brings you all the way out to Cottonwood Creek?" "2 things, actually." He shifted uncomfortably. "First, to apologize properly for what happened that night in my establishment. I should have intervened." "You had your business to consider," Delilah said, not unkindly. "Few would risk crossing Sheriff Randall. Even so, it wasn't right." Billings drew a deep breath. "Which brings me to my second reason for coming. I heard about your concert being canceled and about your engagement to Stanton." "News travels fast," Delilah commented. "It's a small community," Billings agreed, "but not everyone agrees with Randall and that pompous judge. There are those of us who believe Trinidad needs more culture, not less." He hesitated, then continued. "I've purchased the old theater on Front Street. It's been closed for years, but the structure is sound. With some cleaning and minor repairs, it could host your concert." Delilah stared at him in surprise. "You bought a theater?" "For my concert," Billings chuckled. "Not just for you, Miss Haywood. I've been looking to expand beyond the saloon business for some time. Trinidad's growing families are moving in, the railroad's bringing new people every month. A proper theater could be profitable in the long run. But Wilson's injunction applies to the church and other public venues under his jurisdiction," Billings interrupted. "The theater is private property, and I'm inviting you to perform as my guest." Different legal situation entirely, according to the lawyer I consulted in Denver. Hope blossomed in Delilah's chest. "You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious," Billings smiled. "Consider it my wedding gift to you and Stanton. The concert can be held the week after your marriage should give us time to make the place presentable." When Mason returned from checking the cattle in the north pasture, Delilah ran to meet him with the news. His initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism as she explained Billings's proposal. "It could work," he admitted. "Billings is right about the legal distinction, and having the concert after our wedding removes their main objection to your moral character. Then you approve?" Delilah asked eagerly. Mason kissed her forehead. "If it's what you want, then yes. But let's focus on our wedding first. The concert can wait a week." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the late summer sun casting a golden glow over Cottonwood Creek Ranch. Delilah stood in Harriet's bedroom, looking at herself in the mirror as the older woman adjusted the simple veil attached to her hair. The dress wasn't new, it had been Harriet's daughter's wedding gown, altered to fit Delilah's slighter frame, but it was beautiful, with delicate lace trim and tiny pearl buttons down the back. Around her neck hung her mother's cameo, the only piece of jewelry she had brought from Boston. "You look radiant," Harriet said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Mason won't know what hit him." A knock at the door announced Jake's arrival. "Ladies, the guests are all here and the reverend's ready, and the groom's about to wear a path in the porch floor with his pacing." Delilah laughed, her nervousness giving way to joyful anticipation. "We can't keep him waiting, then." With Harriet making last-minute adjustments to her dress and Jake offering his arm as escort, Delilah made her way to the front of the house where the ceremony would take place. The ranch hands and their families had gathered in the yard, along with the Parkers and a few other families from the surrounding area. Even Edgar Billings was there, standing respectfully at the back of the crowd. But Delilah had eyes only for Mason, who stood on the porch beside Reverend Thomas, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new suit and polished boots. When their eyes met, his face transformed with a smile so full of love that it brought tears to her eyes. As Jake led her toward the porch, a commotion at the edge of the gathering caught her attention. Sheriff Randall and Judge Wilson had arrived, accompanied by 2 deputies. They didn't approach, but stood watching with disapproving expressions. Mason had noticed them too, his jaw tightening momentarily before he deliberately turned his attention back to Delilah. As she reached the steps, he extended his hand to help her up, leaning close to whisper, "Nothing they do can touch us today." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Thomas spoke of love and commitment, of building a life together founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. When the time came for their vows, Mason's voice rang clear and strong. "I, Mason Stanton, take you, Delilah Haywood, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to cherish your spirit, honor your gifts, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. Your song has become essential to my heart, and I vow to provide a safe place for it to flourish for all our days." Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks as she repeated her own vows, adding, "Your courage and kindness have shown me what love truly means. I promise to fill our home with music and joy, to stand firm beside you in all challenges, and to love you faithfully until my last breath." "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Thomas proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mason, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of the audience but unmistakably passionate. When they turned to face their friends, the applause was enthusiastic, drowning out any objections Sheriff Randall might have voiced. The celebration that followed was everything Delilah could have wished for. Tables laden with food prepared by Harriet and the other ranch women. Music provided by Tom Cooper on fiddle and Luis Vasquez on guitar. And dancing that continued well into the evening. Even the presence of Randall and Wilson, who remained on the periphery like dark clouds threatening a sunny day, couldn't dampen the joy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Mason took Delilah's hand. "It's time we said good night to our guests, Mrs. Stanton." Her new name sent a thrill through Delilah. "Mrs. Stanton," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." They thanked their guests and received final congratulations before slipping away to the main house, which would now be their shared home. As they reached the porch, Delilah paused to look back at the celebration still continuing in the yard. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "That I never expected to find this," she answered honestly. "When I left Boston, I was running away, not toward anything specific, but somehow I ended up exactly where I belong." Mason turned her in his arms to face him. "And where is that exactly?" Delilah smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "Here with you, on this porch where I'm safe. Where my music is valued, where I am loved for who I am." His kiss this time was unhurried and deep, a promise of the night to come and all the days that would follow. As he lifted her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. The days following the wedding passed in a blissful haze for Delilah, adjusting to life as Mrs. Stanton as mistress of Cottonwood Creek was easier than she had anticipated. The ranch hands and their families accepted her new role without question, and Mason proved to be a considerate and passionate husband. Their nights together were a revelation, a merging of bodies and souls that left Delilah breathless and wondering how she had ever lived without his touch. By day, they each attended to their responsibilities, Mason to the ranch, Delilah to organizing the household and preparing for her upcoming concert. True to his word, Edgar Billings had crews working feverishly to renovate the old theater on Front Street. Delilah rode into town with Mason twice to check on the progress, and was amazed at the transformation. What had been a dusty, neglected building was quickly becoming an elegant performance space, with rows of newly upholstered seats and a refurbished stage. "It's magnificent," she told Billings during their second visit. "I never expected anything so grand in Trinidad." The saloon owner beamed with pride. "Wait until you hear the acoustics. Had a fellow from Denver come in to advise on that specifically. Said it's as good as any theater in the state." "Mr. Billings, I don't know how to thank you." "Your performance will be thanks enough," he assured her. "And perhaps if it's successful you might consider regular concerts, say once a month." The idea took root immediately in Delilah's imagination. "I would love that. And perhaps eventually we could bring in other musicians, create a true cultural center for the region." Mason, who had been examining the theater's newly reinforced balcony, rejoined them with a smile. "Already planning to transform Trinidad's cultural landscape, Mrs. Stanton." "Is that too ambitious?" Delilah asked, suddenly uncertain. "Not at all," Mason assured her, taking her hand. "If anyone can bring high culture to the frontier, it's you." The concert was scheduled for the following Saturday evening. Posters appeared throughout Trinidad and surrounding communities, announcing Mrs. Delilah Stanton, soprano, in an evening of classical song. The mention of her married name was deliberate, a clear statement that her position in society was now unassailable. But Sheriff Randall and Judge Wilson were not so easily deterred. 3 days before the concert, as Delilah was rehearsing in the nearly completed theater with the pianist Billings had hired from Denver, the two men appeared. "Mrs. Stanton," Wilson said, the title sounding like an insult on his thin lips. "I understand you intend to proceed with your concert despite my previous objections." "Your objections concerned a concert at the church by an unmarried woman of questionable standing," Delilah replied calmly. "Neither circumstance applies now. I am performing in a private theater at the invitation of its owner, and I am a married woman." "There are still regulations concerning public performances," Randall interjected. "Permits required, fees to be paid to the town." "All of which have been properly obtained and paid," Billings said, emerging from the back of the theater. "I've made certain everything is in perfect legal order, gentlemen. Judge Wilson himself signed the performance permit yesterday, or at least his clerk did." Wilson's face reddened. "I was not made aware. Standard permit, standard procedure," Billings interrupted smoothly. "Nothing that required your personal attention, surely." Outmaneuvered, Wilson changed tactics. "Mrs. Stanton, while your legal right to perform may be established, I must question the moral wisdom of such a public display. A newly married woman's place is in her home, attending to her husband's needs." "My husband fully supports my musical career," Delilah responded. "In fact, he'll be in the front row on Saturday night. Will you be attending, Judge Wilson, Sheriff? I'd be happy to reserve seats for you." The bold invitation, delivered with perfect poise, left both men momentarily speechless. Finally, Randall recovered enough to say, "This isn't over, Mrs. Stanton. There are many ways to enforce moral standards in a community." After they departed, Billings shook his head admiringly. "You handled them beautifully, Mrs. Stanton. Not many would stand up to Wilson so directly." "I've learned a great deal about courage since coming to Colorado," Delilah replied, "particularly from my husband." When she told Mason about the encounter that evening, his reaction surprised her. Instead of anger, he laughed. "You invited them to attend." Oh, I would pay good money to see Wilson's face if he actually showed up and had to admit he enjoyed it. You're not worried, Delilah asked, about Randall and Wilson? No. Mason pulled her into his arms. They're bluffing now. Your marriage has removed their most potent weapon, the question of propriety, and Billings has outmaneuvered them legally. Then you think the concert will proceed without incident? I think, Mason said, dropping a kiss on her forehead, that Trinidad is about to experience something it will never forget, and I couldn't be prouder to call the star my wife. The night of the concert arrived with an air of anticipation that could be felt throughout Trinidad. The newly renovated theater was sold out, a fact that astonished Delilah when Billings informed her as she prepared backstage. Sold out. But I thought, classical music in a frontier town. Never underestimate curiosity, Billings said with a wink. And there might be a few who came hoping to see some sort of scandal, but they'll leave having experienced something beautiful instead. Delilah had chosen her program carefully, beginning with more accessible pieces before introducing the audience to more complex operatic areas. As the house lights dimmed and she stepped onto the stage in a midnight blue gown that Mason had ordered specially from Denver, she was struck by the sight before her. The theater was indeed full, with people from all walks of life occupying the seats. In the front row sat Mason, handsome in his formal attire, his eyes shining with pride. Beside him were the Parkers, the Coopers, and other friends from Cottonwood Creek. And to Delilah's astonishment, in the third row, looking distinctly uncomfortable but undeniably present, sat Judge Wilson. With renewed confidence, Delilah nodded to the pianist, and the concert began. She started with Schubert's Ave Maria, the pure, sacred notes filling the theater with ethereal beauty. From there, she moved to English art songs, then folk melodies from Scotland and Ireland, before concluding the first half with Mozart's Queen of the Night aria, its demanding coloratura showcasing the full range of her talents. The intermission brought enthusiastic applause and excited murmurs from the audience. Mason made his way backstage, his face alight with admiration. "You're magnificent," he told her, taking her hands in his. "Every person in that theater is spellbound, including Wilson." "He really came," Delilah marveled. "I never thought he would." "Curiosity is a powerful force," Mason replied with a smile. "And your reputation has been the talk of the county for weeks." The second half of the concert featured more challenging pieces, arias from Verdi and Puccini that told stories of love, loss, and redemption. Delilah prefaced each with a brief explanation of the context, drawing her audience into the emotional world of each piece. When she concluded with Puccini's "O mio babbino caro," a plea from a daughter to her father to allow her to marry the man she loves, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The final note hung in the air like a prayer before the theater erupted in applause. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, with many in the audience stamping their feet and calling for more. Even Judge Wilson, though he remained seated, applauded with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. Billings was ecstatic. "This is just the beginning," he declared at the small reception held after the performance. "Trinidad is ready for culture, Mrs. Stanton, ready for what you have to offer." In the weeks that followed, Delilah found herself at the center of a cultural awakening in Trinidad. The success of her concert led to requests for music lessons from families who had previously canceled, as well as new students eager to learn from the town's celebrated soprano. Billings, true to his word, scheduled monthly performances at the theater, featuring not just Delilah but other musicians from the region. Most surprising of all was the gradual thawing of relations with Judge Wilson. While never warm, he became respectfully cordial when their paths crossed in town. Sheriff Randall remained hostile, but his influence seemed diminished by Wilson's change of heart. Life at Cottonwood Creek settled into a new rhythm for Delilah and Mason. She divided her time between ranch responsibilities, music lessons in town, and preparations for her monthly concerts. Mason supported her endeavors wholeheartedly, often adjusting ranch business to accompany her to Trinidad for performances. 6 months after their wedding, as winter's grip on the land began to loosen with the first hints of spring, Delilah shared news that brought a new dimension to their happiness. "A baby," Mason repeated, his voice filled with wonder as he placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" Dr. Parker confirmed it yesterday, Delilah said, her eyes shining. "We should expect our child around late September." Mason gathered her into his arms, his face reflecting a joy that ran deeper than words could express. "A child," he murmured against her hair. "Our child." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. The nursery, adjacent to their bedroom in the main house, was refurbished with a cradle Mason carved himself, and quilts sewn by Harriet and the other ranch women. Delilah continued her performances, though with less demanding programs as her pregnancy advanced. "You should have seen the judge's face when you walked on stage last night," Mason told her after her 7th-month performance, which would be her last until after the baby's birth. "I think he was scandalized by the sight of a visibly pregnant woman performing in public." "Did he leave?" Delilah asked, amused. "On the contrary. He stayed until the end and even came backstage to offer his congratulations. Said something about being pleased to see proper family values taking root in Trinidad." Delilah laughed. "He's determined to approve of me now that I'm a respectable married woman expecting a child." "Little does he know that my respectable wife still sings revolutionary arias about freedom and passionate love," Mason teased, placing his hand on her rounded belly where their child had just kicked. As summer faded into early autumn, Cottonwood Creek prepared for its newest resident. The ranch hands joked about having a little songbird soon filling the main house with music, while Harriet stockpiled baby clothes and blankets as if preparing for twins. The birth came on a crisp September morning, just as the aspens on the mountainsides were beginning to turn golden. After a night of labor attended by Dr. Parker and Harriet, Delilah delivered a healthy son with a strong set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. "Listen to that cry," Dr. Parker chuckled as he placed the swaddled infant in Delilah's arms. "Seems he's inherited his mother's vocal abilities." Mason, who had paced the porch through the night, was finally allowed in to meet his son. The look on his face as he gazed at the tiny boy in Delilah's arms was one she would remember for the rest of her life, a mixture of awe, love, and healing. "He's perfect," Mason whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Delilah knew. "David," she said softly, "after my father. David Thomas Stanton." "David," Mason repeated, trying the name. "I like it. Strong but gentle, like his grandfather." As Dr. Parker and Harriet quietly left the room to give the new family privacy, Delilah shifted to make space for Mason to sit beside her on the bed. He settled carefully next to her, one arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting protectively over their son. "I never thought I would know this happiness again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After Caroline and our son died, I believed that part of my life was over." "I know," Delilah said gently, "but life had other plans for us both." Mason kissed her forehead. "Do you remember that night at the saloon, when I said you should sing on my porch where you'd be safe?" "I remember every word," Delilah assured him. "I had no idea then how much those words would change my life, our lives." He looked down at their sleeping son. "That your song would bring such joy to Cottonwood Creek, that it would lead to this moment." Outside their window, the land stretched away toward the mountains, bathed in the golden light of early autumn. The sounds of the ranch, horses in the corral, men calling to each other as they worked, the distant lowing of cattle created a backdrop of peaceful industry. Delilah leaned her head against Mason's shoulder, their son cradled between them. "Sing something," Mason requested softly, his first lullaby from his mother. And so, her voice gentle and sweet in the quiet room, Delilah sang to her son a Scottish lullaby that Mason's mother had once sung, a thread connecting past and present, weaving their stories together. As the years passed, music remained at the heart of the Stanton household. Delilah continued her monthly concerts at Billings's Theater, which became a cultural landmark for the region. Her reputation grew beyond Trinidad, bringing visitors from as far away as Denver to hear the soprano of the Sangre de Cristos, as she became known. David proved to have inherited his mother's musical gifts and his father's quiet strength. By the age of 5, he was singing alongside Delilah at family gatherings and showing promise on the piano that Mason had purchased for their 10th wedding anniversary. 2 more children joined the family, a daughter, Elizabeth, born 2 years after David, and another son, James, 3 years later. The Stanton children grew up surrounded by music, horses, and the endless skies of Colorado, equally at home in the refined setting of their mother's concerts and the rugged work of their father's ranch. Sheriff Randall eventually lost his position to a younger, more progressive man who recognized Delilah's contributions to Trinidad's growing reputation as a cultural center. Judge Wilson, to everyone's surprise, became one of her most devoted supporters, regularly attending concerts and even donating to the music school she established in town. Cottonwood Creek Ranch flourished under Mason's guidance, expanding its operations and influence throughout the region. But it was the sound of Delilah's voice, carrying across the ranch yard in the evening as she sang on the porch where she had always been safe, that became the heart and soul of the place, a reminder of how love and courage could transform lives in unexpected ways. And sometimes, when the day's work was done and the children were asleep, Mason and Delilah would sit alone on that same porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, watching the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. In those quiet moments, they would remember the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with violence, but led to a life filled with music, love, and the profound safety of belonging.